Hello again, everyone. Welcome to our journey through nerd culture and Christ. And we this is probably as nerdy as you can get because we are knee deep in the Twilight Zone.
Absolutely.
Yes. Professor Carvey and I are um, probably, I guess, kind of stuck in the Twilight Zone, and it feels good, right?
It feels great. Yes. I'm comfortable here.
Yeah. So, and a quick when we talk Twilight Zone, we're watching episodes from the original series, which premiered from 1959 to 1963.
Yes.
And analyzing the philosophical angle of what's going on, what's happening in the minds, because like any great piece of fiction, while there's a lot of cool sci-fi or fictional, events happening, mythical events happening, the human nature and how we respond to it is front and center.
Absolutely.
And how we deal with this. And so the show was rebooted. I don't know if it kind of fell. I think it was always one that certain people were like big fans of. I don't think the ratings were ever great. I need to go back and review that. I'll talk about that in our next episode. But was there time to do a little research on it? But it was popular enough that there was a movie that came out that had, it's always an anthology. So you have different stories in the show and different actors and something different every time. So there were 4 episodes that were all remakes of original episodes from the series. That was the movie.
Yep.
And then it was 2-3 years later, they reboot the series.
Yep.
And that was very short lived. It didn't last 2 or 3 years, but there were some pretty interesting ones that were plays on the episodes of the original one, and then they were some original ones that were pretty good too. There was another show that came out around that same time in the 80s called Amazing Stories, which was kind of like that too, but wasn't, Twilight Zone doesn't always have what we remember it so well because it certainly doesn't wrap everything up in a neat bow.
Absolutely.
Amazing Stories had a tendency to do that. I think that was a Spielberg production.
Well, it definitely seemed to kind of be one of the genesis of that kind of anthology series centered around kind of a central trope. You had lots of them, like I talked about before. The Outer Limits was one.
Right.
Of course, Tales from the Crypt was one.
Yeah. And that was a Stephen King. Did Stephen King have a big hand in that? I think because that was originally a movie. Am I right? Or
it was originally a comic series in the 60s.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Great. So the next phase I want to say was there was one in the early turn of the century, as we say. It feels weird to say that, but like 2003, and then Peel has. They got 2 seasons out of it. I don't know if it's still going though.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's definitely got a different feel to it. It's I think darker and more. I hate to say the word degenerate, but it definitely is more adult in its presentation.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I haven't seen them.
Yeah.
Maybe that can be some more research.
Yeah. There you go. But we have plenty to research right now.
Absolutely.
So we're in this phase and this is, I think, really our first swim through this show. First episode we're reviewing, but we're going to review another one today. So in our previous podcast episode, we reviewed Walking Distance.
Yes.
And Walking Distance has several incredible themes, mostly the theme of nostalgia and running back your life, running it back over. And I'd ask you the question, if you could go back to any point in time in your life, when would it be? And there actually is another question, I guess, kind of built off of that. There's the why. Would you go back just because of there would be one where you would want to go back because it was, a good time, a joyous time. There might be some you'd want to go back where you could change something.
Yeah.
So that, but what's just kind of throwing out. And by the way, that's kind of the theme of Walking Distance, right?
Yeah.
It's like he really, Martin loved. It's kind of weird though. He looks back, and I think this is what nostalgia does.
Yeah.
He's looking back. He's a 35-year-old man, 36.
Yeah. 36. Yeah.
36. Okay. 36-year-old man. And this is, and 36 is an interesting time. 35, 36 is an interesting time for any person's life, any adult life, because you are, I remember at one point in my mid 30s, you just have that self-awareness moment like, oh, I'm not young anymore.
Yeah.
You know how you're like, this is all the elements of youth are gone.
Yeah.
I mean, at least mentally, like maybe the excuses you can, I'm still young, so I'm figure it out. I'm, and it wasn't a lot of people. It's like, they get that idea when they pull a hamstring or something.
Yeah.
And it was just I think I had pulled a hamstring around that time, but you just get this sense, oh, it's over.
Yeah.
And there's some good and bad with that, but I think that's part of it too, right? That's part of what he's dealing with, I think.
Well, and it's really interesting. The episode really resonated with me. Like I said, I'll be 42 this year, and so I'm literally coming up on my 25th high school reunion. And so I kind of was thinking, because he goes back to a point in time 25 years prior when he was 11, and now he's 36. So it's literally kind of in the same paradigm. And it's an interesting world in my mind as I'm thinking about this. And this is kind of a little bit of a side, but maybe there's some armchair psychologists out there in our listener group that will probably write comments about this. But like, I don't have social media. And so for me, when I picture all the people I went to high school with, even now, 25 years later, knowing we're all in our 40s, I keep picturing, oh yeah, they're 18. And I don't go back to my hometown very often because I'm in St. Louis and it's in Mississippi. And so very rarely do I run into somebody I used to know.
Yeah.
And like I ran into a good friend of mine and her husband one day in the airport, and I'm there with my wife, and I look over at her, and for some reason we almost barely didn't know each other. It's weird. We used to be like close friends in high school. But when we left, I told my wife, I was like, man, she got old. And my wife lovingly looked at me and said, yeah, but you're old. And it was weird, this stark realization, we're not 18 anymore. And so it does play mind games with you, this wanting to reconnect, especially in some cases where you don't have a stark realization, like I don't with, I don't have social media at all. So I can't just go look people back up and see, oh, well, this is what they look like now. In my mind, we just walked out of graduation. And that is such a weird mind game that nostalgia plays with us. We hang on to these pieces of the past and don't accept or can't accept, or maybe suppress the acceptance of the reality that that's all gone.
Yep. And sometimes we try to, I think we make decisions in our lives, or maybe just live our lives in a way that they're those people that we were with when we were 18 are still impacting us.
Yeah.
As I like to joke sometimes. And I got to not a big argument with a former worship leader, but he said, you never really leave middle school. And I thought, well, you never really leave high school, but either way, it's not, either one's good. You still have, like you're showing up blocker. And I hear people talking about stuff, even conversations with family, that are my age and older, they talk about something they dealt with. I'm like, is it just, was that in the cafeteria? What was that? Just were you coming from the locker room? It's like, that sounds like something you would have talked about when you were 18. It's just
right.
15 even. It's really weird how some of that how we kind of structure our lives in a way we're like, we're still worried about the same things we were worried about when we were 12.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of maturity. I think it's part of spiritual maturity to say, I'm not worried about who likes me and who doesn't like me.
Absolutely.
I mean, to a certain extent, you don't want to go, you want enough people to like you, don't go to prison or whatever, but you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I think to me, I was thinking about walking distance. I think the thing, and I think we may have alluded to this, but maybe we didn't fully just hammer this idea, this concept home, which is when you look back, you do a whitewash, if you want to call it that. You scrape all the negativity, and all you remember is the good stuff. And so the 36-year-old Martin is talking to the 11-year-old Martin. And just to clarify for those who may have not seen the previous episode, the little twist here of Walking Distance is he's living in New York, has a really good job, kind of empty life though, not married with kids or anything. Not that those who are single have chosen the Pauline model or have an empty life, but he's living, those our listeners are single folks in the audience who are, in their mid-30s or whatever. They probably have good, strong spiritual reasons for doing that. His was just having fun. Yeah, so, professionally things are going well, but he's kind of vacuous. And then he drives out in the country and he ends up at his old hometown and he goes, wait, that's my old hometown. And car breaks down, he walks a mile because it's in walking distance to his hometown. He sees a sign, right? And he doesn't just walk. This is 1959, first season of Twilight Zone. He walks into 1934, his town, and so, and this is, there's so many questions about this. Like, has the Twilight Zone put him here in 1934, or have they just given him? However the Twilight Zone works, and whoever's, if someone, is it a manifest representation of his memory of it?
Right. That's a great question. And that's one that the show doesn't really present, although we do see the change when he comes back through and he goes back to the apothecary, and of course you can tell it's changed. There's music, people dancing. It's not empty like it was. The guy charges 35 cents for the soda instead of the 10.
Right. So inflation's definitely is a factor in nostalgia.
Apparently inflation still works in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it does. You cannot escape inflation.
You can't escape it. But there is this seeming shift, and it kind of makes you wonder. And I know we're kind of past the walking distance, so I don't want to keep diving back into it, but I do think it's cool that the quote that Serling has, where he said a man can cover a lot of ground and do a lot of thinking when he walks the pavement or something like that from day to night or something to that effect. And it kind of makes me wonder if, like, I at first I didn't think about that, but now that you say that, it really makes sense. Maybe he went back in his mind. Like, for all we know, he's just walking the streets of the town.
Right. Or he, right. Or it was perhaps a physical manifestation.
Yeah, it could have been
how he saw
like
this. Yeah, and it's really, and that's something really interesting to think about, because when you see things, and I think this is probably part, and I think that's a very critical note, because I think there is a psychological aspect to this.
Absolutely.
Because when you're 11 years old, you see the world a certain way.
Yep.
And it's, and then they say, when God, Jesus talks, the faith of a child, the mind of a child, there's this, I'm just going to say it's like this, and I'm not going to get, stuck in the muck with all of the complexities that the adult mind deals with. And that's one of the challenges you have, is when people want to, basically they have the same goals and desired outcomes in their life at the age of 36 or 40 that they did when they were 10 or 11, but they also have all of that, all of that complexity and all those things they've gone through, and all of that jaded cynicism, which is kind of hard to avoid at some level. Yeah. It can be a kind of a toxic brew. Well,
and I was going to say, there's a couple of things you said that I wanted to kind of, as we transition through this and kind of move on to the next episode. One, I wanted to talk about how you had said, and I think it's so true, when we talk about nostalgia, we cannot forget that there's always that, like you said, whitewashing, that looking back at a situation almost better than it was. And I think about this. I mean, think about the correlations between, like, the books of First Kings, Second Kings, and the book of First Chronicles, Second Chronicles we have in the Old Testament. I mean, one of them is obviously pre-exilic, one's post-exilic, and as they come back, they're telling similar stories. And one of the I think the easiest places to see this almost whitewashing, and obviously we believe it's inspired by the Holy Spirit. There's a reason why.
There's a reason. Yeah.
But it is interesting that, like, when you tell the story of like Bathsheba, when we have in 2 Samuel 11 and 12, with the story of King David and Bathsheba and that whole thing happening, we have a very similar story in, I think, maybe First Chronicles, something like that. But they talk about the wars that are going on that David technically should have been there for. And we have these references to the events. But whereas Samuel recounts the story of Bathsheba, First Chronicles doesn't. And it's almost like this. We want to tell the story of the people, the king, with this nostalgic aspect, keep the lineage pure, keep this idea running. And so we even have a big biblical example of this. And I thought that was interesting. But one thing I wanted to, I know our listeners are probably going to write in or give their comments on the questions as to when they would go back. I wanted to answer your question.
Yeah, go ahead, please do. And then we'll transition to kick the can.
Yes. And this is actually a solid transition.
Because the can kickers have longer to go back. They have more to revisit. Yeah.
I said this when we first started talking, who hasn't ever had the dream of like going back to high school and reliving, their days of high school? Kind of like you said, we'd never escape high school, knowing everything you know now. And
which is crazy, because looking back, you're like, what's worth, like, if there is a Hades on Earth, it's such and such high school, right?
Oh yeah,
I mean, it's the worst. It's the worst. Everyone's like my
small
wife,
town Mississippi high school. Trust me,
my wife worked. She's been teaching at a high school for 7 years, and I go, when she first got the job, I'm like, what are you? Who would? It's like what G. Gordon Liddy, who's one of the Watergate plumbers. He said. When he was in prison, he goes, well, I never really, they asked, well, what did you think of the people there? And he goes, well, I never really thought much of the wardens or the security guys, because they were in prison, voluntarily. And so I always wondered about teachers and folks who work at high schools, they volunteer. I mean, they're getting paid, but
absolutely. Who would want to go back to that mess?
Yeah. It's a tough road to hoe. Lord love them. Go ahead.
But I think about that, and I've had dreams of that. What would it be like to go back and, be my 40-year-old self mentally, knowing all that I know, and it's a cool concept. But I'll tell you this, and this is the truest answer. And I know it's going to sound cheesy, but I love my wife. And I remember clearly the day I met her. It was April 30th, 2021. I was a waiter at a Mexican restaurant in Jackson.
It wasn't 2021, right?
I'm sorry. It was 2001. My bad.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, 2000. Is it 21 years
you have 3 kids, right? Yeah.
It was 2001. So April 30th, 2001.
Right.
And I was a waiter at a Mexican restaurant, and I kept picturing it. So I've had this dream numerous times, but in every single case, I panic in my dream. I know it sounds weird, but I panic in my dream because I just know whatever happens, I want to get back to that moment. Yeah. April 30th, 2001. At the On the Border in Jackson, Mississippi, just so I can meet my wife again. And so, like, I think about, the moments in my life that are so critical. I mean, I remember where I was the night my mother died when I was a kid. I remember, when I got saved at 27 years old, at 3 a.m. in June, whatever that day was, at 2008. But also the day I met my wife. And so these are the moments that over the course of my life, when I think back nostalgically, these are the benchmark moments that you cannot look at anything but starkly at. And I think that's important, especially as we transition to this whole idea of kick the can. Nostalgia can only go so far, but reality pierces through nostalgia at certain points and anchors us down. And I think that these moments that we think about that cannot be whitewashed, for good or bad, they are there, are what anchor us to reality. So you want to go to Kick the Can?
So Kick the Can, season 3.
Great episode.
It was originally, it's always fun to see the original broadcast date. It was
62.
February 9th, 1962. So, right in the dead of winter, 1962. and it is a setting. The setting is that oh so joyous place of the nursing home,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And let's see, I'm going to keep track here. Let's see, 20 minutes. The okay, and this we both get a little confused because, and this is where it's again back to mental your memory. And
Yeah.
I saw the movie before I saw any episodes on the TV show, and I think same with you.
Yes.
And so this was the third of the fourth, might have been the second scene. In fact,
Yes.
it might have been because they kind of went, they tried to run the gamut of the Twilight Zone themes as much as you can with 4 episodes, and so this is kind of the feel good moment. And so there's but the plot is basically this, and they just have different endings.
Yeah.
Nursing home, a couple of friends, Ben and Charlie. Charlie, it says, I'm going to be young again because I think young.
Yeah.
And so again, they're both residents of the nursing home, but I feel young. I think young. I will be young.
Age is only in my mind.
Age is only in my fact. We always say that, age is just a number.
Yeah.
Charlie, age is just a number. And Ben's like, no, this is reality. You're here and you need to accept that.
Yep.
And you've mentioned, and we'll probably need to talk about this, maybe kick this down to the next episode, but this a running theme that maybe I didn't identify initially in our first Twilight Zone episode, but the concept of fate.
Yeah.
Whether you accept fate or you just go, no, don't. And so the show has different things to say about it. And again, I don't know if it's taking one side or the other, because there's episodes that are evidence of no, you shouldn't, and then there's episodes that are evidence of yeah, you should.
Yeah.
And maybe and there's definitely some episodes that there's evidence of you just don't have a choice, so just roll with it. But this one's going to indicate Charlie has a choice, because Charlie encourages, and I love this about Charlie. He's going to get locked down because he's going to be put in isolation, like a prison, I guess.
Yeah.
Because Ben tells on him. Ben's a snitch, and informs the caretaker, the manager, that hey, Charles has got issues. He's lost he's untethered from reality, and he thinks he's going to be a kid again. So they put him in isolation, but then he actually is a ringleader in getting all the other citizens, the residents, to sneak out one night and play kick the can, this old kids game, right? And I love how they distract the security guards by throwing firecrackers at them. It's a great scene, and just kind of nonchalant. I don't know how they got firecrackers, but they go out, and then we don't. And this is interesting because in the movie version, we see them play kick the can,
right?
It's a long, and we notice this transformation, but I don't for some reason, am I wrong? I'm going off a little memory because I haven't seen it recently, but we don't see them playing the game, at least not for very long in this episode.
I don't think it does happen very long. What's interesting is this is really where the 2 episodes diverge. And this could be obviously another conversation, but maybe it has to do with the pragmatism of the 80s. They changed the idea because in the 80s episode, Scatman Carruthers, who kind of plays Mr. Bloom, who's the Charlie in this case, wants to give people the gift of being young again. And
he doesn't live. He's either he just becomes a resident.
Yeah, I think he's like a nomad almost.
Right, he's a nomadic nursing home traveler who just he I can't even remember it. It has been years since I've seen the movie. I'm trying to remember if he actually was an official resident for that short-term period, because he goes in and he encourages them all to play kick the can.
He's the inciting kind of incident.
Yeah, he's the instigator.
But in the movie, and I think this goes back, I said, the pragmatism of the 80s, maybe they all wonder, they become kids, right? Just same thing as in the episode of the original show. But in the movie, they start wondering, well, what am I going to do now? Where am I going to sleep? How am I going to eat? And they kept, at least it seems like they kept their memories. They kept their mind.
Right. They were still the same people.
Right. They just had
from
the appearance of being
70 to 75 to 12.
Yes.
Or even younger, maybe.
Yeah. But in the episode, they didn't. It appears like because at some point, when Charlie's friend Ben he recognizes Charlie. And so he tries to go to him. It's like, oh, wow, this worked. You're not crazy. Take me with you. But Charlie doesn't recognize him. And they all run away. That they're scared of him, this old man chasing them down.
Yeah.
And so they disappear. And, talk about this accepting fate or resolve to fate. Twilight Zone really kind of plays hard and loose with, or quick and loose with fate. Sometimes it says you should take it, like you said, and sometimes it doesn't. So that's a fun topic we can talk about later. But his fate, Ben's, is ultimately he's sitting there holding the can, almost like you can almost picture the guy who picked up the lamp after Aladdin got through with it. Like, come on, let's go.
Yeah. Come on, can. But so the magic's not in the can.
Yep, the magic's not in the can. And he's sitting there on the steps, the only resident now, because all the other residents are children again and gone.
So he's got this place to himself, right?
Yeah.
At least
he gets the pick of the room. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's kind of there's a lot going on there, a lot of questions to ask. One, we assume Charlie, and we talked about this show Somewhere in Time, this movie, it's romance, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it again. Yeah. But the whole idea is, Christopher Reeve, the Superman, was in this movie, and he falls in love with Jane Seymour, who a lot of people would, but Jane Seymour is an actress who, her heyday was like theater in the turn of the century, 20th century. So like 1912, was like her heyday. And so she comes to him at the end of her life, and this is in the 70s. But anyway, the whole point is he talks to one of his professors. He goes back. He's a pretty well-known playwright, and he goes back to one of his professors and say, time travel, you talked about it. And he said, yes. And it's all about your brain and
it's in your mind,
believing that you're there. And so this is kind of the theme of this episode, that Charlie can be young again because Charlie is young at heart, young at mind, and he can do that. And so I guess, but what I wonder is, A, is that why? And then B, did all the other residents think the same thing? Because now they're all young.
Yeah. I mean, there had to be something connecting them. And this is really interesting from a philosophical standpoint, because it's almost like coming out of this Kantian tradition of idealism, that you can interpret reality in a way that best suits you, how you can see it. And their reality was, I don't have to be old anymore. And so you obviously see, Charlie had either convinced them or, led them to believe almost, the ties to fanatical religion is obviously evident here. He took his flock, he took his followers, right? And they bought in and they reaped the benefits, it seemed. But the question then becomes, and I think that this is what we're left with. This is kind of the can, as it were, that's left behind. Who's in a better state? Ben, who at least lived his life,
right,
and now gets the rest associated with that, or these residents who now get to live again, but yet at the same time have to go through all the pain and misery that they went through once in life.
And I think that's really the key of the episode. And then it's always instructive to get Serling's take on things, even though I don't know if Serling.
He didn't write this.
This is a George Clayton Johnson.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. This is George Clayton Johnson. But so who knows if he came with this. Sunnyvale Rest, a dying place for ancient people who have forgotten the fragile magic of youth. By the way, that nursing home was kind of a weird looking nursing home too, right? Yeah. A dying place for those who have forgotten that childhood, maturity, and old age are curiously intertwined and not separate. a dying place for those who have grown too stiff in their thinking to visit the Twilight Zone. So clearly, this is a anti-acceptance of fate, and they are criticizing Ben, and Ben doesn't have this opportunity to feel the joy of being young again. But it is kind of tricky. So we would think any of us would take youth over aging because, I mean, there's so many things you could do. You could start over, you could, but to me, the benefit of if you had that, if that was an option and you were somehow able to figure it out, I guess I always thought that it would be, it's only truly valuable. And this kind of speaks back to walking distance because the whole point is Martin appreciates his youth and where he lived more.
Right.
Because of the experience of the next 25 years and what adulthood is like and all of that. And so I feel like it would be more valuable to be able to go back to youth if you can take your thoughts with you. One, you can go, oh, great, I just bought more time. So there's that benefit. Because right now, if they're just kids and their minds are erased of where they were, and I guess I'm kind of curious why they decided to wipe at least. And of course, we're made to assume that they don't know Ben.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems pretty clear that, I mean, the recounting, it says the boy does not seem to know him and runs away. So it seems pretty clear that Charlie did not know him. Yeah. Not only did they turn back the physical aging, but it seems like they just kind of rewound the tape.
And so then you're like, okay, if they rewound the tape, then I guess that means they think that they're just going home to, like, back to being like their mom and dad. They're going to go home now, and they're all
that sounds terrible. That's the case.
I
mean, you're in your 70s or 80s. I mean, your family's been dead for years. I mean, you're going to go back. And that's what I'm saying. Who has the better deal here? I mean, Ben's lamenting the fact that he can't be young with them, but I mean, my gosh, at least Ben knows where he is. These kids running off. I mean, I didn't even think about that. Who has the worst deal here?
Yeah, and that's where you juxtapose it with the 80s, where they'd all decide, I just remember having to deal with this and that, and now you're gonna have to do this, and they all go back to being old, except for
they all
one.
Go back, except for one, I think.
Right, you're right. They flip the script, and one of them stays young and kind of just runs out, like, I'm going to live the adventure, right? Yeah. And he knows he's going to live the adventure, and he has more adventures to live. And so I think maybe you're left with, and maybe we can talk about this, and this may or may not be on point. And again, part of it is maybe we can take the old postmodern approach that what would we do? And what do we think, as opposed to what Serling and George Clayton Johnson think. But it is interesting to try to figure out what they think. And maybe their answer is whether you accept fate or not is an individual decision. And it just comes down to what you want and whether you, and I think there's probably something there. Because being young is really about the unknown, right?
Absolutely.
And then this episode, and I guess that's the difference, and maybe why they went one direction.
Yes.
With the 60, the TV version versus the movie version, because that one kid who does say, I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm 12 or whatever, and I'm going to enjoy this reboot. And I'm going to figure it out. He's fully aware. He has full recognition that, hey, I was 75, 80 years old or whatever. Yep. And now I am young again. Whereas it's a blank slate for the 60s. And so I guess maybe that's why they're like, would you want to just go back and run it back? Because they really probably are going to run it back because they're the same people. Whereas if you're running it back, like you were cognizant of it, you wouldn't be the same 10 or 11.
Yeah. And that's where we get, of course, really into interesting issues with whole, the time and, time dilation and things like that. Knowing what you know, would you do the exact same things that you did before? It seems like in the TV show, they would have followed exactly like you said, the same track, same decisions.
Yeah.
The question is, though, it's obviously not the same time. If it's, let's say, 1962 and they're 82 years old and now they're 12 again, that's 70 years. So they're back into the, turn of the century, but it's not the turn of the century anymore. So their whole world is going to be, their paradigm is shifted. But in the movie, you at least get this. I mean, you still kind of have that unsettled feeling, but it seems like the movie rounds that out a little bit and softens that blow by saying, well, they at least had the moments. And this one character, I think Mr. Agee or something like that, who sticks around as a kid, he at least acknowledges when one of the characters who didn't go with them at first, kind of the Ben character, stays behind, and he asks him, take me with you. And this young kid who used to be the old man says, you can't go. And so there's this at least acknowledgement of the difference in space and time there. And
that's right. There was one character in the movie who didn't even do it short term, right?
Yeah.
They stayed old the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And he acknowledges at the end, well, kind of similar to Ben, I messed up. I wanted this again. And you even see him at the end of the episode trying to kick the can again, thinking the can is magic, kind of like Ben's holding this, the empty Aladdin's lamp, saying, where are you? But yeah, it at least in the movie, the characters seem to get that closure. Hey, we had one last shot, and we had fun.
We were kids. We remembered how it was to be young and to do.
We got to taste it and
to dream, and to just, the world's just this unknown. And there's something magical about just the world being the first time you've ever experienced anything.
Absolutely.
The first time you had ice cream. The first, first time. There's just something. First time you smelled brisket or whatever. There's just there's something magical about that.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the movie, you see the Scatman Carruthers character, who's in Scatman. He was also in The Shining and a bunch of other 70s TV shows. But he's going to another nursing home, and so I'm thinking, does he? Has an HMO hired him to save them money on the retirees, or maybe if he's for Medicare's hired him, Medicaid, somebody's hired him to reduce the youth healthcare costs. But yeah, he's just going to give people this sense of hope or whatever. And so it's an interesting question. Would you want to go back and would you want to? It seems like it would be valuable to go back and know everything about, about being an adult and you might do this, do that, but then you might not, you might not meet the people that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just don't,
I look at my daughter and I think, wow, had I not met my wife, I would have never had her.
Right.
And you think, what's better? And that's even really talk about the nature of humanity. How selfish would you have to be to say, I'm giving up all of this just to have my second shot again, knowing that the possibility of I would miss out on that.
Right. Because as soon as you do that, I've often, it's kind of from, science fiction perspective, just thought through that. Like if you do say, oh, well, I could have done this, I could have done that. And so I want to go back and do this or that. But then those, your family would be, they would say, unless you think there's a multiverse where you can, like they can exist here and you can, and that's a different, a different science fiction segment altogether. But, they would be gone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I look at my daughter and I think, wow, she would not exist. That'd be a whole different world.
Yep.
And this is a really quick side, but my world primarily is mainly comics, and this actually happened in the Flashpoint. I think I mentioned before, where Flash goes back to try to save his mother. That's the one thing he tries to do. He goes back in time, save his mother.
You see it a lot with the Flash.
Yeah. And he does it, but in doing so, everything changes.
Yeah.
And there are characters who had, like children. And then in the Flashpoint, the alternate world, they don't. And when they find out, wait a minute, I had a child and you took that away from me. Yeah. I mean, just imagine the starkness of that, knowing that, that's just the height of hubris and selfishness, to think that this one moment is so important that all these other aspects, wow, just it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so many implications.
That's one approach to time travel, right? And changing time. Yeah. If he went with the he's in DC. See, if he'd went with the Marvel version, it wouldn't change anything. Except his mom would have been back, right?
Yeah, just go pull one from another universe.
Yeah. That's just weird. So, and we got to wrap it up here. Any final thoughts on Kick the Can or Nostalgia, Walking Distance, or feel like we've done a pretty good job of covering all that?
Yeah, I think we covered them well. I definitely would encourage the listeners, hopefully at this point, they are, checking these things out. And especially with Kick the Can, I think it's worth it. I don't know, I mean, the whole movie, I think is worth it. But, with a lot of these, I think it's important to see the parallels, because they are moments in time.
Yep.
And they do have their sticking point. So you see the 60s and this kind of starkness in the 60s version, and then the 80s is very much kind of the second Gilded Age, this pragmatism. Right. And right. I think it's interesting to compare the two. So I hope that our listeners are taking the time to enjoy the original.
Right. Absolutely. And so then that's nostalgia. That's a couple of episodes that really speak to that. And again, we'll be coming back to that. We're also going to be talking about concepts like acceptance of fate and whatnot. And I think we're going to lead into that topic on our next episode with Time Enough at Last. Is that the plan? Yeah,
there's a couple of episodes that center on that, but Time Enough at Last is going to be a great one to go with.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll talk about both those and then continue this concept of life, maturity, aging, and all of that. So again, watch the episodes and we'll look forward to the next round. So click on the next episode of ours.
See ya.
All right. See ya.